Today, I'd like to tell the legend of Arachne. This story will provide an opportunity to explore the complexity of gender dynamics and power imbalances in ancient mythology. Let's get started. There was once a Lydian girl named Arachne who lived in Anatolia. Her father, Aitman, was a fabric dyer in the city of Colophon, and his daughter was so skilled at needlework and rug weaving that there was no one more talented than her. Even fairies from the mountains and forests would come to look at her work. Arachne kept claiming that she could compete with goddess Athena. All this talk and boasting reached the goddess' ear. The goddess grew angry, showed herself as an old woman, and appeared before Arachne. She gave her advice, telling her to be more humble and refrain from competing with the gods. But Arachne paid no heed. She said, "If Athena wishes, let her come and compete with me in weaving." Upon hearing this, the goddess grew angry and showed her true form. Everyone who saw this immediately showed respect to her, but Arachne did not back down from her decision. So they began their contest. Athena wove a magnificent weaving about 12 gods of Olympus. At the very top, Zeus sat on his throne around him. Poseidon, Apollo, Artemis, Aphrodite, Hermes, and other gods had taken their places. She also placed in her weaving tales of mortals who had defied the gods and were punished, Rhodope and Hemus, who were thrown into mountains for their arrogance and taking the gods' names. The Pygma woman, who was transformed into a crane and condemned to wage war against her own people. Antigone's transformation into a stork for defying Hera with the beauty of her hair, and Sinras, who turned to stone in agony upon seeing his daughter transformed into the temple stone steps. It was clear that Athena was sending Arachne a clear message through the images. Defying the gods bring severe consequences. However, Arachne chose a far bolder and more direct path. She weaved in her art the gods' romantic adventures that were far from fortunate and had nothing praiseworthy about them. Zeus was using other mortal women like Europa, Danae, Leda, and Theopa in different forms, in the form of a bull, swan, rain, satyrs. Arachne art was technically flawless. The color transitions, the flow of the patterns, and the emotional impact of the images were extraordinary. But perhaps even more importantly, the theme showed in the rock was a clear critique. Through these images, Arachne skillfully demonstrated that the gods were not flawless, that they too were full of pride and weaknesses, and that they committed injustices against mortals. As Athena examined Arachne's work, an overwhelming rage filled her. She had to acknowledge its technical perfection, yet the meaning conveyed by the rock was a direct challenge to her and to all the gods. These images, woven by Arachne's own hands, displayed the courage of a mortal artist to defy divine authority. In Athena's eyes, this courage was the gravest of crimes. She suddenly sprang to her feet and, in a fit of rage, tore Arachne's rug to shreds. Then, taking the hard shuttle in her hand, she struck the young woman's forehead several times. Left in a state of profound shame and despair, Arachne, unable to bear the revelation she had suffered, attempted to hang herself. Just then, Athena cut the rope, saving Arachne from death and called out to her. You will live, but you will remain suspended. Let this fate be inherited not only by you, but by all your descendants as well. After speaking these words, Athena sprinkled a magical elixir over Arachne. Under elixir influence, Arachne's body began to change rapidly. Her hair and ears vanished. Her head and body shrank. Her fingers were replaced by slender legs, and her torso transformed into an abdomen. From that moment on, Arachne was a spider, just as she had done in her former life. She was now condemned to an endless punishment of weaving webs. Athena had done this so that Arachne would spin spider webs in dusty wall corners for all eternity without ever reaping any benefit from it. Naturally, news of this event spread quickly, first in Lydia, then in Phrygia and the surrounding lands. Everyone began talking about Arachne's story, as her pride, her courage, and the lessons she learned were passed from mouth to mouth. People learned again the price of defying the gods. And so the story ends here with this message. The story appears in Ovid's Metamorphoses book. As we can see, the central theme is pride as a form of defiance against the gods and the punishment the gods will mete out for it. Pride comes from the word hubris, which means the deification of the self, also referred to as the divine ego, and is naturally the greatest mistake made by heroes in the Greek tragedies. This ambition manifested through unchecked pride, self-admiration, arrogance, and insolence ultimately leads the hero to ruin. However, the stakes and the interpretation derived from it represent a traditional and orthodox reading. According to this myth, the gods are right while mortals are wrong and presumptuous. In fact, this traditional reading goes so far as to convince us that the word, a concept, or a text has a single, unchanging meaning, and it attempts to persuade us that this meaning is not cultural, but rather real, pure, unconstructed, and natural. So why? First, we must ask ourselves this: whose interests are served by presenting it this way? This is a historical construction of culture, religion, justice, and patriarchal society. It is a textual construction, but it is possible to offer a different interpretation of this. I believe it is definitely possible. This is a constructed text just like any others. Everything that is constructed can be deconstructed and reconstructed. This is precisely where we need to employ the philosophical and literary analytical approach that Derrida calls deconstruction. Because, as he also says, meaning in text are not fixed. Thinking through deconstruction is not merely about questioning accepted truths. It's also about asking whose interests this truth serves. It is clear that the traditional narrative in the text serves the interests of God, justice, and patriarchal culture. God, justice, culture, or even a table, all of these are cultural contracts. That is why the text was constructed accordingly during its time. So now it is time for a new reading, a reconstruction of the text. In this new reconstruction, I would first like to talk a little about Athena. She is a goddess. She represents war, art, justice, and wisdom. Her father is Zeus, and her mother is Metis. But because the child she will bear will be more powerful than Zeus. Zeus swallowed the pregnant Metis. Sometime later, Zeus gets a headache and asks another god for help. That god cracks open Zeus' head with a hammer, and Athena is born from it. Zeus loves Athena very much. He turns a blind eye to everything she does. Athena is the chief goddess of both Athens and Troy, but during the Trojan War, this goddess of justice aids the Achaeans through various acts of trickery. Why? Because Paris of Troy gave the golden apple to Aphrodite instead of her. That's why she isn't much different from the other gods depicted by Arachne. She is arrogant. She has never had any children. She was a virgin. In fact, her virginity and the fact that she was born of her father all seems like an effort to distance her from womanhood. A goddess hostile to matriarchy and enamored with patriarchy. Zeus absorbs the woman's characteristic ability to give birth into himself, and by giving birth from his own head, ensures the woman's further weakening through a brighter, bloodless, and more intellectual form of birth. Childbirth is no longer a sacred act unique to women. In a society where the womb is viewed as dirty, bloody, and emotional, he achieved a purer form of childbirth by giving birth to Athena himself. We can actually learn this from Athena and Apollo in the myth of Orestes. In the myth, when Orestes killed his mother, who had murdered his father, the first human court is established, and Athena casts the deciding vote in Orestes' favor, acquitting him. There, Athena says, "I was not born of a mother, therefore in all things I support with all my heart the man who is the true son of my father Zeus. Therefore I will not consider that woman's death to be more important," she says, thereby demonstrating the devolution of woman in a patriarchal society. For them, even if a woman gives birth to a child, she is just a caregiver. She is not a parent. The true parent is the father because he sows the seed. As a male god, Apollo supports this perspective and asserts that a man can have a child even without a mother. Here is Athena, daughter of Zeus, of Olympus. She was not nursed by a dark womb, he says in the book. In this light, it does not make much sense to view Athena as a goddess who takes pride in being a woman. She always protects and supports men. And how we can describe Arachne? She is the daughter of Lydian merchant from a kingdom established in Anatolia. She was born in Colophon. Even today, carpet weaving remains an important source of income for women in that region. For this reason, some interpret this text as the story of the triumph of the art of weaving in the competition between Greece and Anatolia. It is even claimed that spider seals were used on the trade cards in Anatolia at that time to represent Arachne. Arachne defines the brewery weave in her society that she learned her art from Athena. In fact, if she had learned this art from Athena, she too would have created works praising the god just like Athena, but as we can saw in the story, she views her talent as unique and exposes the divine realm, the patriarchal order, and the flaws of the gods. She sees within herself the power to offer criticism. As a mortal woman, she is strong and self-assured enough to defy the gods. When humiliated, she chooses suicide, which is also an act of protest. In short, Arachne is a powerful young woman who, through this form of criticism and expression which was forbidden to her in her own time, rebels against the hierarchical order that excluded her. So, in this story, Athena is the guardian of the patriarchal order. Power and might take center stage in Athera's rock. Her narrative is specifically designed to intimidate Arachne and force her into submission. This is why she weaves into her work the fate of arrogant mortals who do not know their place and those transformed as punishment. Arachne's wrath challenges the power and authority held by the god as a ruling class, exposing misogynistic behavior and hypocrisy. By waving at her rug the love affairs of Athena's father and his exploitation of women, Arachne poses not only the god's fault but also a patriarchal conception of dominance. In the eyes of Athena, who takes pride in being her father's daughter, this is a critique of the patriarchal order. By depicting bad egg against mortal woman by male gods, Arachne defended women who had suffered injustice. Athena immediately tears Arachne's work to pieces. By destroying her message, Athena silences her and strips her of the power to reach others. She has taken away Arachne's great power through her artwork. This is the act of censorship. After the rock is destroyed, Athena beats Arachne so savagely with the shadow. After that, Arachne's only way out is to attempt to hang herself. This too is an act of rebellion on Arachne's part. In ancient Greece, suicide was considered a shameful act because life was viewed as a gift bestowed by the gods, and life and death were subject to the will of the gods. By attempting to take her own life, Arachne encroaches on the domain of the ruling class and abolishes for herself and the privilege they had reserved solely for themselves. This act did not go unpunished. She will be transformed into a spider, an outcast, and reviled creature, and condemned to hang from a tree, waving her webs forever outside the realm of human language and representation. In this way, Arachne is deprived of the thing she would have created in the world. She can no longer create a work of art. She cannot earn anyone's appreciation. She becomes a creature for removed from art with a message that holds no power, lurking in the corners of doors and walls. Her role in the world is suppressed and rendered obsolete. Yes, unfortunately, the handles of the axes that cut us down in this forest are also part of us. In short, I conducted an analysis by destruction this traditional narrative and examining it from the exact opposite perspective of what it actually advocates. In this myth, culture, religion, art, gender, and politics are all interweaved. Therefore, it is open to deeper and more detailed interpretations. It is not important to debate which narrative is more valid, because every text is a construction and each is an interpretation. Every interpretation is valid. Some are more valid than others. Bye.